wish you guys could actually be here with me to witness where I am recording this podcast episode right now. It's quite hilarious and ironic that for those of you who don't know, I am currently living at home with my parents, with my 3 children, and my husband, and I am coming to you live from the garage. Now, it just so happens that today's topic is quite hilarious when it comes to the fact that I needed to find a private, quiet space to record in. Now, today it just so happens that it is a rainy, sleepy Sunday afternoon, so all the bedrooms are occupied by sleeping grandpas and sleeping babies. So here I am coming to you live from my parents' garage to talk with you all about how crazy they are. No, not really. But I will let you know that today we're going to get really real and really raw. I'm going to share with you a lot of what I've experienced and what I have also learned in this past almost year of living with my parents since immigrating back to the States from my husband's home country of Belgium. I promise you, you won't want to miss it. There's going to be some really hard truths coming your way, especially because if you clicked on this episode, whether it's the first time you found yourself here at the Energized Mama podcast, or you are a subscriber and lover of this podcast, we are going to peel back some layers to help you also apply this in your own life. Whether you live with your in-laws or your parents, or like me, like I used to be thousands of miles away, there's always something that we can learn from one another about how to do relationship with our parents, with our in-laws as an adult. There's no handbook. I don't know about you, but I didn't get one when I got married about how to, be married, but also, how to do things with your in-laws or your parents once you transition into that new big role of your life. So I'm going to walk you through the biggest lessons that I've learned this year and also how you can apply them into your own life. So buckle up. We're about to get real, as I love to do here. And I am so excited that you've made it to this episode of the Energized Mama podcast. Let's go.
The Energized Mama Podcast, a place where we explore together how to raise those littles to know the Lord while growing in your own intimacy with Jesus, learning how to keep your energy while handling the inevitable stress, and rediscovering yourself outside of motherhood. It is possible. Let's do it together.
Mommy. Mama. Energized Mama. Yeah. You might do.
So I know I said that there's no handbook that comes for how to do basically all the hard things in life, right? The things that we jokingly say, man, I wish there was a handbook for how to adult, right? When you first maybe leave your parents' house and you either go off to college or you get into the workforce, there's not a whole lot of guidance. And depending on how you were raised, maybe your parents super prepped you how to do all these things or maybe not. And then there's the transition of how to be a wife, right? How to be married, once that, those warm fuzzies, not necessarily go away, but they wear off a little bit and all of a sudden you start to see all the faults in your spouse, right? How do you do this? How do you go about it? And then becoming a parent and then dealing with your parents as you're a parent and your in-laws and things. And, I would like to amend my statement and take that back because ultimately the best handbook that you ever need, I have good news for you for all these situations. It all comes in one book. You don't need to buy different editions. You don't need to go to different authors and find the ultimate, the guru or the expert on all these different topics because nobody out there is going to beat the big God on how to handle each and every one of these situations. And where I may be sharing with you today from my own personal experience and how I have navigated these really hard, challenging moments, so much of where my application comes from my time spent in the Word of God or my time with Him. So just know that there's nothing that's ever going to replace that in my life for sure, and I hope in your life either, sister, because no one can do it better. And that's what I love about the Bible, is that it is so applicable for every area of your life, every season of your life, every generation. Honestly, it's like the same book that taught your grandma how to be a good wife and how to parent her children, how to navigate life, decades ago is the same one that's going to guide you and also your daughters and your sons on how to just be a child of God, right? So, well, I want to start by sharing a little bit of a story and kind of take you guys into the reality of my situation of where I'm at. So here I am, I'm 36 years old, and I find myself living back with my parents. And what's ironic is this has only really happened two other times in my life. And one of them was right before I met my husband. Now, let me take a step back. When I had met my husband, I had been living with my parents for about 10 months, and I had just, kind of found some solid ground after what I would have called at that point in my life one of the hardest experiences of my life. So I, after college, had moved in with my parents for a year, and then I moved out to Los Angeles from Florida, completely just trusting God, knowing I wanted to work in the entertainment industry, not exactly sure knowing specifically what I wanted to do. I kind of wanted to act. I kind of wanted to host. I could imagine myself, doing a lot of different things in the industry. I just knew I wanted to be a light. I wanted to counteract this crazy culture. And this was back in 2011. And just be, a good shining light and representative of Christ in the entertainment industry. And I did that. I did that from 2011 until 2017, almost to 2018. And one thing that's really hard about being a starving artist is the starving part. The artist part is fun. The starving, as in how to put food on your table, is the not so fun part. There's a lot of hustling, a lot of weeks and months just on your knees praying, like, how am I going to pay this rent that's due tomorrow? And, God always provided for me. And I really learned a lot through that faith walk. And that was really, truly most of my 20s, but at 29 years old, I found myself right before the month before my 30th birthday, moving back in with my parents because I had gotten myself in quite a bit of debt. Now, why am I sharing all this? Because this was the unique season of moving back in with my parents, even though I didn't want to be. I was super independent before. I had lived almost a decade in LA by myself, with roommates, but on my own. And then I was back in with mom and dad. And during that year, my parents and we got along really well. We've always been super close, kind of three peas in a pod in some ways. I'm my mom's only child. We've always gotten along really well. My parents have been together for 40 years now. But there were some sticky points. You could tell for both of us, it was a challenge for me to now be back under my parents' roof and in some ways submit to them and their authority being in their home, but also for them to see me as a now truly grown woman, as an individual, as someone with my own wants, my own desires, and my own life, honestly. But over the time, we ended up figuring it out, and I really began to enjoy and let go and enjoy living with them. Flash forward to 10 months after moving in, I was in a good flow in my life, and they were living in San Diego at the time, so I had left Los Angeles and moved in with them to, again, just kind of consolidate some debt, get back on my feet. And my plan was to always move back to Los Angeles. But those of you that know my story, I did not move back to LA. I actually met my husband when I went to Belgium for what I thought was going to be only about, a week and a half to surprise a girlfriend from high school at her wedding. And at her wedding, I met my husband. And so we flash forward after that, after meeting my husband, to 6 months later, we had gotten married in the States, and I had immigrated to Belgium. So left my parents' nest, went to Belgium, and then I was there for 5 years until last year. After many highs, ups, and downs with immigration, we got approved to move here with my husband, with our 2 boys, and also my husband's daughter. So here we came in July of 2023, full of expectation, full of hope, full of excitement, just out of our pants excited, honestly. It was a dream since my husband and I met to move to the States. But in the beginning, I moved to Belgium because it just made more sense for me to come join him, since his daughter at that time was only 9. Now at 14 at the time, she chose to come move with us. So we're like, okay, let's do this. Let's bring our whole family. So what I was expecting to be, yes, a challenging transition for my family, because in my head, my husband and my daughter, my bonus daughter, my son Mason, who was 3 at the time, they were Belgian, and that was their norm, was living in Belgium, growing up in Belgium. I anticipated that it was going to be hard for them. What I didn't anticipate was how hard and challenging it was going to be for me coming back to the States. Now, I imagine that it would be hard for me maybe to, get adjusted and figure out like, what is it to be, a mom here in the States. I had truly gotten married and basically immigrated to Belgium. So even my wife life, all I knew was doing that in the context of my husband's culture and my husband's, the language and just my husband's surroundings and his norms, where now it was like, whoa, boom, in my norms, with my people, with my country, with my language. Also, my motherhood began in Belgium. And I may have forgotten to mention that about 2 months before we moved, I had also had our second baby boy in Belgium. So I was also new mom again, coming in and just adjusting to life, not just as a mom of two little boys, but also a full-time motherly role model to now my teenage bonus daughter. So that was a lot, and I was anticipating all of that. But what I did not anticipate and what I did not imagine, and what honestly has been the hardest part of this year, and I think a lot of it was because I was not prepped or prepared, was how hard it would be to live back in my parents' house. And I want to put a big disclaimer. My parents are the most amazing people. I am still their biggest fan, and we are very close. But I never anticipated how much our relationship would shift in those 5 years that I was away. I'm so glad I'm actually recording this episode now, because had I recorded this, honestly, even about a month ago, I think this would have been a very different episode. There were very many moments in the beginning of my first few months here that I would find myself weeping out of just frustration and pain from being here under my parents' roof. And for those of you that hear me talk about how close we are, and what a great relationship we've always had. And even if you maybe follow on social, you'll see a lot of smiling photos and videos. And even if maybe you know me personally and know my family personally, you may be wondering, like, Shy, like, how can you say that? Like, what's going on? Or like, how can that be? Well, I think that what has happened is that I never imagined or anticipated what it would be like to no longer be a single young woman that was just myself, right, under my parents' roof, 3 peas in a pod, to now I'm moving as a matriarch, as a family, into another family. My parents may be small, may just be the 2 of them, but they are a family, and now my family, which is 5 of us, and a husband and a wife with a teenager, and a very vivacious preschooler, and a new baby, are now moving under their roof. And I could have never imagined how that would change our relationship and our dynamics. And not to mention, now I've been out of my country for 5 years. I have totally changed in a lot of, I feel, great ways as a person. My mind has been expanded. My spiritual depthness has just grown really deep. And my parents have also changed as well. They've gotten older. They are now in their later 60s. And so I think those were things that we just didn't fully realize, or you couldn't fully realize when you came here on vacation. Because I had come to visit my parents about 5 or 6 times, I think, since becoming a mom with my son Mason, everywhere from when he was 3 months, 8 months, year and a half, all the way up till about he was 2.5 was the last time we came on vacation. And then we moved here when he was 3. And, some of those times when I would come, I'd stay for 3-4 weeks, and there were some uncomfortabilities, but nothing is like actually fully coming in and living with one another. So from this year, from these trials, I want to share with you guys what I have learned by going through and growing through all of these ups and downs. And so in hopes that if you're experiencing some of these things too, that you can learn from my wisdom, whether it's learn from my mistakes and not make your own, or if you're in the thick of it and you've also made a lot of mistakes here too, that you can just, find comfort in that, and knowing that you're not alone, and knowing that you're not perfect and you don't have to be perfect. And there's going to be definitely a lot of room for growth here. So let's dive in. I have 3 tips today to help you navigate the struggle and the awkwardness that is sometimes felt between your parents and your in-laws as you become a wife and a mother. So the funny thing about my story is that I feel like I had to learn a lot of these lessons in reverse. I feel that even some of you may be listening, or, some of you who are maybe even single listening, something you've heard people talk about is a lot of people, I believe, learn some of the lessons I did early on in their marriage. At the time of this recording, my husband and I have been married for 5.5 years, which is so crazy because there's so many times we feel like we just met, and when we first met, we used to say we felt like we knew each other for 5 years. So now actually knowing each other for almost 6 years, being married 5.5 years, it's just like, what do we feel now? Do we feel like we've known each other 10 years? And I tell you, if I could list what has happened in our lives in the past 5 years, it is, I feel like, something that most people would typically go through in a decade. So, but I digress. What I'm getting at is that I did not think about that because I was 7,000 miles away when I began my wife life and I began my motherhood away from my parents. Some of the things that we've had to go through in this year have been a little bit like whiplash, right? Because whoa, we didn't have to really deal with this before. And, my parents they knew I became a mom. They saw me become a mom on the internet. They met my son. They saw me mom at different stages of my son's life. But in between all of those visits, 8 months, 9 months would go by. And it was just kind of a little bit of vacation mindset and mode. But now here, all of a sudden, I was realizing, wow, okay, so we have some big parental differences here, or we have some big parental values, and now I'm under this roof, which I want to balance. How do I respect your opinion and your beliefs, mom and dad, and how you raised me, and not feel like, that I am making fun or picking on your parenting beliefs or your gut instincts, but mine are not yours. You may have raised me, but I now have realized I have some different thoughts and beliefs, especially ones that my husband and I, coming together and aligning together and aiming to be more one with him. So how do I do this, especially we're living under the same roof? So my first tip today, that if you find yourself in this really challenging place, right, of continually maybe having these head-butting moments with your parents or your in-laws where you guys have different values and you guys have different, parenting techniques, what I would encourage you to do is define what's important and what's not. So basically what I'm encouraging you to do here is pick your battles. Figure out what in your parenting journey is the most important things to you over what you will go to battle for and what's not. One way you could do this is start to list all of the things that you've noticed that you and your parents or your in-laws butt heads about, or conversations you've had where there's disagreements, or maybe if you don't live with your parents or your in-laws, say when you go over for holidays or birthday parties or on Sunday afternoons, what are the things that make you cringe when your mom says that? What are the things that makes you roll your eyes that your father-in-law says? These are things that, if not confronted, even within yourself, can build upon itself. And the thing is, you're going to need to learn to let some things go. That's just the fact of the matter. If I didn't do this, I would constantly be at war with my parents and within myself. And I realized this firsthand. I realized I needed to take an assessment of what are the things that really, really tear me up inside? What are the things that make me want to cry? What are the things that make me cry? What are the things that I am so afraid if I don't counteract, that my children will not be raised the way that I want? And I know that sounds maybe dramatic, but again, I'm also coming from a place of, this is my day in, day out. My parents and I are here, not 24/7 together, but my dad still works. My mom does not, but she runs her own small business on the side. So we're together a lot. So there's a lot of things that, get stepped on a lot. And I've had to really take an assessment of, is this really that big of a deal? If I don't correct this or step in and say something about this, what's the worst that can happen? And I'll tell you, there are some things where I'm like, oh yeah, I guess that's a Nana thing. Like, that's not that big of a deal. But then there are some things that I'm like, if I don't say something and this continues to go on, what bad habits could form here? So first, you really have to figure out what's important to you. And the thing is with kids, right, it's just like they have seasons, and sometimes seasons can be a week long, sometimes they can be months long, right? Especially when it comes to, say, like bad behavior. Our son currently is having our 4-year-old is currently having a very hard struggle with, for lack of a better term, kind of a TV addiction. He never had this before, and I think living with my parents, there's more TVs in the house. In Belgium we had one TV, and here I believe we have 4 TVs, and so he just has more access to it. And there's also a lot more kind of chaos going on in the house. There's more people, so sometimes a TV's on, or say my dad's watching TV and we don't want my son to be watching TV, and yet he sits down and watches it and convinces Papa to turn on his shows. So things like that, and we've had to realize though that there are some things that is just a season. He wasn't like this before, and we're really believing that this is something we're going to work on with our son, and he'll get through it, right? But so you kind of have to let there to be an ebb and flow, because there's going to be some things, right, that are very important to you right now, but then they won't be. And so what's important is that you retake this assessment too, that you do this like every couple months, I'd say, because, kids have regressions in their behavior, just like they have sleep regressions, right? And so you're going to see different parenting styles and techniques, even within yourself and with your spouse, but especially with those around you, right? So you're going to see that come out as your kids also come out. So definitely I would say, pick your battles, and what is important must be then communicated, right? And so that would be step or tip number 2, is to make sure you communicate these things, okay? So I'm not saying communicate every single little thing that bothers you and that frustrates you. Now, at least to your parents or your in-laws. Now, the little things, you can choose whether or not to discuss them with your spouse. I'm a verbal processor, so I feel much better when I've at least gotten something out. I'm very, very intentional about who I share it with, though. I have a couple sisters that have really become mentors in my life that I open to up about this. They're sisters who also have been there with me for a few years. So it's one of those, those friends or that sister in life you have that you don't even need to tell the whole backstory because she knows, Those are the people that are so refreshing to go to because you don't got to give them the whole scenario. You can just say this and they're like, yep, okay, gonna stop, drop, and pray. Got you, girl. Like, I know. Oh, yeah. Oh, I remember the last time he did that. Or I remember, oh, your mom's at it again. No worries. I got you. And the people that are, of course, like, this is harder to do, but it is the most amazing grown woman thing to do, is go to your friends that are more mentors, that are women who are going to pour into your life and tell you to stop, drop, get on your knees and pray, to openly admit where you have sin in your life. Don't go to the friends that are just going to give you the advice you want to hear. Right? Like, that is not going to take you where you need to go. That's not going to take you to next levels in your spiritual life with God. Okay. So it's not always easy to find these friends, but find those friends that are going to love you, truly love you. And true love, right? True love is going to cast out all fear, but true love is going to tell you when it hurts the truth. And it's going to tell you things that are going to make you better. So it's okay to process those little things with those kind of friends, with your husband, and also with God first and foremost. Like, go to him first and foremost, right? There's times where I've had to bite my cheek, step into my room. And honestly, there's times, ladies, where I've cried. I'm like, I just got to get this out. This is frustrating me so much. I can't hold it anymore. I feel like a tea kettle, right? Like, about ready to just blow off steam. But then there's those things that are on your list that you have defined is important. Like, yes, this matters to me. I can't make any more excuses about this. I can't just bite my tongue over this one anymore. I need to be able to communicate. And then that's when you need to prayerfully ask, Lord, how can I communicate this in the best way that my parents or my in-laws will understand? Because Lord knows there are different communication styles and different understandings between everyone. can in a family, but especially with different generations. So I would definitely pray about how to communicate it, and just know that sometimes in relationship, especially in families, it is just so important to over communicate, because you want to communicate to comprehend. You don't want to communicate just to talk, like just to have someone hear you. You want to have them understand you, right? So you want to make sure that they comprehend, and that may take a couple times, right? I know that there's been times when I've had to reiterate and share a couple times things to my mom to really let her know I'm serious, but also for her to understand, we're in a different generation. I feel like our parents' generation and many generations before them, one of their biggest goals, if they had any when it came to parenting, was providing food for their kids, right? Providing shelter. And that was about it. That was about as much. It's not that they didn't love their kids, but that was the way I feel like they showed their kids. And now I'm 36, going on 37. I feel like our generation is more aware of the emotional needs of children. We have more resources for ourselves. So we are now, for lack of a better word, woke, right? Meaning like we are woken up to this need as a human being to, guide our children emotionally and spiritually, and we have more resources. And so it's almost like, when it's like you can't unsee something, it's like you come across like a video on the internet, and it's like showing you, like, I don't know, like I recently this week saw this shark attack, this orca attack a great white shark out of nowhere. It just like zoomed, boom, right into this great white shark's midsection and literally killed it on the spot. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you can't unsee that. Like right now in my mind, I can see the angle. I can see how far out of the water the shark came out. I've seen it. It's there. I can't unsee it. And that is going to be the same thing that happens sometimes, right? With situations in our families, with our in-laws and our parents that happen. You can't unsee it, right? And so there's times where you just have to continue to communicate. You want to be able to communicate so that they comprehend. And the more and more that you do communicate it and stand firm in your stance and in your approach, the better it's probably going to be to communicate these things, because we now can't unsee it, right? Our generation has all these resources. We have the internet, we have churches that are talking on these things, spiritual thought leaders. It's like we now know, like, it is important to invest in our children's spiritual health and their emotional and their mental well-being, right? I mean, come on, like, we know that suicide is crazy in this country and across the world, and mental health is just like on the downward spiral, right? So we know that we need to, as best we can, as best as the Lord guides us, to attack these things when our kids are little. And, unfortunately, there is going to be topics and different, people out there, and maybe you're experiencing this, different in-laws and parents that are just, at the end of the day, they're not going to respect what you say, and they're not going to understand you as much as they try. And this is where you and your husband, I think, will have to be led to my third point. My final point for today, as I pull this episode to a close, is prayer. Is pray. And it's easy to just say pray, right? But pray for what? Pray in what way? Well, one regard is for what I just shared about, is that there may be a situation where you really have picked your battles. You've defined what's important to you. You've come up from a big list to a small list. You've picked out these certain things that are really important to you, and you've, communicated it over and over as best you can, and yet they're not listening, or they're choosing not to listen to you. And then this is where you got to pray, because then you got to make that decision. What do we do about this? Because at the end of the day, God gave you, yes, your parents, gave your spouse his parents, but now that you are equally yoked, now that you have left your father and mother and created a new family, it is now your responsibility for those children. It's not your mom's responsibility, it's not your dad's, it's not your in-laws' responsibility for their well-being, right? It is your responsibility to shepherd those children and to protect them from any influence. So you may want to pray about what specific boundaries may you need to put up and may you need to put in place with your parents, with your in-laws, to best protect your children and your peace as you parent them, right? Because there is no one in life worth getting in between you and your parenting with your children, or especially who's the head of the house, your relationship with Christ, right? Jesus. But the second is you and your husband's relationship, and there's no one that should come in the way of that, even if it means family. So of course, first and foremost, you need to make sure that you pray how to best handle those situations. But if, say, things are relatively okay, say your family has, they've tried to respect your boundaries or respect what you've communicated to them, but there's still just this tension when you're around them. Believe me, there's some days it's better right now. We're in a good week, just like there's good weeks and bad weeks in maybe your marriage, but same thing with the relationships and households and with parents. There can be good and bad weeks, and right now we're in a good one. But I know that there will be a future storm. I think that's almost inevitable, right? We know that in this world we will have trouble, but God has overcome the world. So I know I have nothing to worry about. But just knowing that storms are inevitable in life, knowing that maybe you're going through a certain, it doesn't seem so big, but you know what? God is in the small things, because the small things can become big things if we don't submit the small things to Him, right? So I would also encourage you to pray over these things that are on your heart, that are circling around in your mind right now. Maybe it's how your mother-in-law talks to you. Maybe it's how she talks to your kid, how she tries to discipline him, how she tries to spoil him. Maybe gives them too many toys, maybe gives them too many ice cream. Maybe lets them do things that in your heart that you feel convicted like are not okay with you. Pray to God to show you how these things can be good. How can the way that your mom is grandmothering, for lack of a better word, your children, how can it be good? Instead of only seeing the bad, see what is this wisdom that maybe she has that she can pour into my kids in a way that I can't. There is this phrase that's been around for many, many years, right, about being a village, and your parents and your in-laws are part of your village. So asking the Lord, Lord, how can this be good? Give me a heart for my mom, give me a heart for my dad, give me a heart for my in-laws. How can you expand my mind to see what an investment they can be in my children? Ask yourself, what does this generation have to offer my kids and to offer me as a parent? Because I think it can be so easy. It's funny, we go through this as teenagers, right? We instantly have this proclivity very often to be a little rebellious, to not want to trust our parents. And I feel that we can often come back to that, 15, 20 years later when we're raising our own kids. It's almost like, I don't want to be like you, or I want to be a better parent than my parent was, right? That is such an often common thing that you hear parents say. But I want to encourage you. In fact, I want to challenge you to ask yourself, what does my parents' generation have to offer my kids, but what do they have to offer me as a parent that my own generation can't? What good can I take from them? What can I learn from them? What can I pass on? Because in a matter of years, that generation's going to be gone, right? So what can we take from them? For me, I can answer this and just say that I love how my parents' generation are tenaciously hard workers. My parents were both born in the mid to late 50s, and it's just amazing. They're blue collar, they're hard workers. They go after what they want. They're big time go-getters. And when I see sometimes, they're very respectful. And when I see in today's society where I see kids being disrespectful, when I see children not working very hard or not being guided how to make better choices, I look to my parents in those moments and I think back to how did they raise me and how do I see them trying to encourage my boys to be respectful, to be brave, to be good listeners, those kind of things. And it's only honestly from praying through the hard moments and God giving me His eyes have I been able to get there. And you can also just pray for what do you need to say and when. I think when is an overlooked concept when it comes to communication. I think we focus sometimes so much on what I need to say that we don't focus enough on when we need to say it, because there truly are good times to have conversation and not so great times. And we want that soil to be fertile, right? Just like there's good times to plant, and you want to make sure that that soil is fertile. So we also want to make sure that our parents, our hearts are ready for what we need to say. I know that there's situations where it's like, just with kids, I've said this so much with my style of parenting is I'm pretty laid back. I am not the mom that is a helicopter mom. I kind of let my kids jump on stuff. I let them get dirty, and the one time I always say, though, where that stops, where I stop letting my kids kind of follow their own bliss and follow their own joy, is when it comes to safety. I'm like, I don't care if my kids kind of run around at the park and they want to jump here and there. But when it comes to crossing the street, you better believe I have my mama bear voice on, and they will not cross that road without looking both ways and holding my hands. And right. So it's like just like with kids, when I pray and I ask the Lord's guidance, like how should I say it? What do I need to say? But also when. I want to make sure that my kids are receptive. With our teenager, we have to do this a lot. We want to make sure that she's receptive to the things that we want to guide her in, right? So same thing with, again, the elders in your life. And ultimately, we can never pray for this enough, but patience. Right? We all need patience. And I have even caught myself, I feel like I need to do this probably more, is to pray for my parents' patience with my children, because, it's been a very long time since they've had little ones in their house, right? And they have very different values and beliefs when it comes to raising children in many ways, or their generation did it differently, right? And now they're just older too. And it can be really hard. In some ways also, though, I've seen them even have more patience than me. And I think that's the beauty of grandparents, right? They've been there before, they've done that, they have, they're in a different season of life than we are of raising our little ones. And so it's nice to be able to, kind of put on different sunglasses, so to say, or put on, again, the lenses to see our parents, our in-laws, through what can they give, what can they offer. And also don't be afraid to tell them that. I notice, and just honestly in life, but especially with that generation, that a word can go a long way. And so I like to call out the things that I see that my parents are doing great and that I love, and make sure I say it. And I just want to say to you today, as we end this episode, that you are doing great. And if this is a burden on your heart, if this is something that weighs really heavy, don't do it alone. Don't do it alone. I have a totally free Facebook community full of moms just like you, moms who want to raise their kids as good and godly, and that have a passion for just life, and want to grow with other moms that want to pursue their God-given passions, in and also outside of motherhood. So if you need a safe place like that, a place where you can have other women to grow and sharpen each other, iron sharpens iron, then go look in the show notes. I've got my Facebook group page linked right below, and you can just hit that link and we'll get you right in and get you connected to our group. So I just want to thank you again for listening to another episode of the Energized Mama podcast. It's been such a blessing to just be here with you. If you have any prayers, please feel free to reach out. Let me know. You can find my Instagram as well below. I love to pray with my listeners and pray for them about the, just the causes on their hearts. And so I am so excited to connect with you guys even on a deeper level. If you loved this episode, please feel free to share it with another mama in need. Feel free to post it on your social media. Just make sure you tag me at Cheyanne Clayman so I can see you and repost it and share in the love. And also, if you would, shoot off a review to me on Apple Podcasts. Those reviews actually help bump up my podcast so that more listeners like you can get episodes like this and they can learn and we can all grow together. Again, here's a big dikke knuffel, which in Dutch means big hug. So here's a big virtual hug from me to you, and I'll see you guys on another episode very soon.